The sky was clear that night. It was March 8, 2014, when Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, bound for Beijing. On board were 239 people, families, business travelers, children asleep against their parents' shoulders. Nothing seemed unusual. The aircraft, a Boeing 777, was one of the most advanced ever built. It was equipped with redundant communication systems, satellite tracking, and safety mechanisms that had made it nearly impossible for a plane to simply disappear. And yet, that's exactly what happened. At 1:19 a.m., the co-pilot radioed his last known words to air traffic control. "Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, the transponder went dark. The aircraft vanished from radar. No distress call, no mayday, nothing. For hours, air traffic controllers believed it was a systems glitch. The plane would surely reappear on another radar. Maybe it had shifted routes due to turbulence. But as dawn rose over the South China Sea, a dreadful silence settled in. Flight MH370 was gone. Not crashed, gone. Entirely erased from the digital web of modern flight. When the first headlines broke, the world froze. Airplanes didn't vanish anymore. Not in the 21st century. Satellites could track a smartphone from space. How could a 200-foot passenger jet simply cease to exist? Weeks passed. Search teams scoured the South China Sea, then the Andaman, then the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. Families gathered in hotel lobbies watching the same footage over and over. Debris searches, grainy satellite maps, officials avoiding eye contact during press conferences. The emotional weight became unbearable. Some still refused to believe their loved ones were gone. Months later, fragments of wreckage began washing ashore, a flaperon here, a wing section there, along the coasts of Reunion Island in Mozambique. The evidence was undeniable, but the mystery deepened. The debris was far west of the expected flight path, and the black box, it was never found. Investigators eventually pieced together a strange new theory. Satellite handshakes, automated pings between the aircraft and an in-mast satellite suggested the plane didn't T-crash where everyone thought. It had made a mysterious westward turn, crossing the Malay Peninsula before heading into the empty blue of the southern Indian Ocean. But why? Some experts believed it was a calculated act, a deliberate diversion. Others whispered of mechanical failure, hijacking, or even cyber-sabotage. But the truth was colder than all of them. The plane had entered a region where no radar, no eyes, no technology could follow. A modern ghost. When search vessels returned months later, their sonar equipment picked up something haunting. Scattered shapes on the ocean floor that looked like fuselage remains, but too deep, too degraded, too unreachable to confirm. It was as if the sea itself had chosen to keep it secret. Even now, over a decade later, MH370 remains one of the most confounding aviation mysteries in history. Every anniversary brings new claims, satellite imagery, debris photos, leaked pilot simulations. But no one can explain what truly happened during those final 6 hours in the dark. Some say the pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah, executed a complex flight pattern, a long farewell traced invisibly across the skies, turning back over his homeland before disappearing into oblivion. Others claim the plane's communications were hacked, its systems overridden remotely. But for those who lost someone on board, theories mean little. What they carry is the unbearable silence left behind. The story of MH370 is more than a disappearance. It's a rupture in our belief that technology can protect us because vanishing isn't supposed to be possible anymore. And yet, the world has seen it happen before. Centuries before flight paths and satellites, there were the ghost ships of the Great Lakes, a freshwater graveyard that has claimed over 6,000 vessels and 30,000 souls. Among them, stories persist of ships that never returned, and others that did, empty, adrift, their crews vanished like smoke. One of the most chilling cases is the SS Bannockburn, often called the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes. In November 1902, the Bannockburn left Port Arthur, Canada, carrying a cargo of grain to Midland, Ontario. It never arrived. For weeks, search parties combed the icy waters of Lake Superior, finding only a few barrels and a lifeboat. The ship was declared lost with all hands. But a year later, something eerie began to happen. Freighters crossing Lake Superior started reporting strange sightings, a ghostly steamer emerging through the fog, lights flickering, following parallel to their route before vanishing into the mist. The description was always the same, a steel freighter, its decks gleaming wet, its silhouette unmistakable. The Bannock. To this day, mariners on Lake Superior still whisper of seeing her on stormy nights, especially near the spot locals call the Graveyard of Ships, a vessel frozen in time, replaying its final voyage over and over again. But what makes the Great Lakes unique isn't just the lure, it's how often the disappearances align with natural phenomena that defy explanation. Sudden electromagnetic disturbances, compass failures, even radar anomalies, sound familiar. When oceanographers compared sonar data from Lake Superior with that of the Indian Ocean, the very corridor where MH370 vanished, they found disturbing similarities. Both regions showed magnetic irregularities strong enough to disrupt instruments. Both regions had unexplained sonar voids, pockets where signals simply died, coincidence or a pattern. Scientists remain cautious, but pilots and sailors who have lived through these zones speak of a feeling, a hum beneath the silence, a sense of being watched, like the air itself turns heavier before something disappears. If you line up the final known coordinates of MH370 with the historical wreck paths of lost ships across major oceans, the intersections form a rough arc known to researchers as the Silent Meridian, a band stretching across the planet where magnetic distortion and radar blackouts have been recorded for over a century. It's here, between the known and the unknowable, that all these disappearances seem to gather, the flight that never landed, the ships that sail in silence, and the questions that no science can yet answer. Maybe the truth isn't about what we've lost, but what's been waiting for us to notice it all along. A soft atmospheric music begins, hinting at mystery. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into the kind of mysteries that don't just pop up in ancient ruins or forgotten landscapes. Nope, these are the chilling cerebral puzzles crafted by human hands. Cold, deliberate, and patiently waiting to be discovered. We're talking about shadows that hide in plain sight, not in the deep ocean or frozen mountains, but behind the eyes of the people we pass every single day. Here, darkness isn't some external entity. It's a profound, often unsettling, reflection of ourselves. Let's start with a name that still sends shivers down spines: the Zodiac Killer. He was so much more than just a murderer. He was a master conductor of chaos, orchestrating fear through cryptic symbols, baffling numbers, and riddles that turned the human mind into his very own stage. It all kicked off with letters, crudely written but precise in their terrifying intent. These weren't just sent to the police. They were addressed to all of us. Every single word dripped with arrogance, taunting, feeding off the media's insatiable hunger for horror. The Zodiac understood something that most killers didn't: that the human imagination, left to its own devices, is far more terrifying than any weapon. Visual. We see a close-up on a typewriter's keys pressing slowly, click, click, the ink forming cryptic symbols on the paper. Then, the camera pans to a corkboard plastered with overlapping crime scene maps and handwritten notes. The Zodiac didn't just end lives, he studied them. He understood that real fear isn't in the act itself, it's in the agonizing waiting, the tormenting wondering, the terrifying not knowing who he would strike next. Even decades later, his letters remain a code that absolutely refuses to die. Experts have thrown everything at them: linguistic profiling, intricate pattern mapping, even advanced AI-driven decoding, and still, fragments remain untouched. It's almost like they were never meant to be fully solved. Because maybe, just maybe, the code wasn't written to reveal his name, but to reveal something about us. Now, here's where it gets even more fascinating. Psychologists who pored over the Zodiac's writings noticed something truly peculiar. Each letter seemed to evolve. The grammar, the tone, even the underlying personality shifted subtly over time. It was as if multiple people were writing them. Or, perhaps, one man was slowly unraveling into many distinct personas. The boundaries between identity and persona blurred, creating a chilling possibility that the Zodiac didn't just want to be feared, he wanted to be shared, in some unsettling way. Visual archival footage flickers to life, showing crowded newsrooms, reporters, their faces etched with urgency, unfold fresh envelopes stamped with those strange iconic symbols. In the background, faint whispers echo through the static, unreadable but rhythmic, adding to the tension. There's a theory, controversial, yes, but undeniably haunting, that the Zodiac ciphers were a form of hypnotic language. That by merely reading them, you were unknowingly participating in his twisted ritual. You were feeding the story. You were, in a way, keeping him alive. Because as long as we keep searching, keep dissecting, keep wondering, the Zodiac, in a sense, never truly dies. As scene transition, the screen fades to black and white footage of an empty Australian beach, waves gently rolling under a pale morning light. The mood shifts, becoming more somber, less overtly menacing. Now, let's journey across the world, to a different kind of mystery, one that was quietly unfolding at almost the same time. This one involved no blood, no overt violence, yet it was equally suffocating in its enigma. It begins with a man found dead on Somerton Beach in Australia, back in 1948. No wounds, no clear identity, just a perfectly pressed suit, a cigarette resting almost casually on his collar, and a tiny torn piece of paper tucked deep in his pocket. It read Tamam Shud. In Persian it means it is finished. Visual. The camera lingers on this small crumpled note. The letters shimmer faintly, almost as if resonating with some unseen energy, then dissolve into white static. Investigators were completely puzzled. There were no fingerprints matching any national database. No dental records offered a clue. The man's internal organs were strangely damaged, but with absolutely no trace of poison. He was, quite simply, perfectly untraceable. It was almost like he had been erased before he ever truly existed. For years, conspiracy theorists quickly linked the Somerton Man to Cold War espionage. A spy, perhaps killed by his own people for some unknown transgression. But newer analyses suggest something even stranger. That small scrap of paper found in his pocket, ripped from the final page of a rare copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, that wasn't torn randomly. Oh no, it was cut with meticulous precision, designed to fit perfectly, and microscopic fibers found on his clothing showed electromagnetic interference, the kind left behind by shortwave transmitters. Visual and macro shot focuses on these paper fibers, glowing faintly as if alive with a static pulsing energy. It wasn't a suicide note, it was a code. And when digital experts reconstructed the original book copy, which was miraculously found months later, they uncovered a faint impression of letters and numbers written on the back page coordinates. One set led to a nearby beach, the other led directly to an old naval facility that had been transmitting encrypted radio messages on the very same night the man was found dead. The connection was undeniable, but the crucial question remained: who was sending these signals, and to whom? The Zodiac and the Somerton Man, two profound enigmas, separated by vast oceans and decades, yet both spoke through codes. Both were obsessed with secrecy, and both seemed to communicate not directly to people, but rather through them. Visual, a split screen appears. On one side, the intricate grid of Zodiac's cipher. On the other, the faint, haunting impressions of the Somerton code. The camera slowly zooms in as the lines on both screens begin to subtly overlap, creating an eerie harmony. Forensic analysts notice an almost unbelievable pattern hidden within the symmetry of their respective letters, a shared frequency of repetition, an underlying rhythm, almost as if both sets were created under the same linguistic influence. An impossible coincidence, unless both were mimicking something far older, something deeply ingrained, something learned. The narrator's tone darkens, becoming more introspective and profound. Closing parenthesis. We often imagine monsters lurking in the dark, waiting for their moment to emerge. But what if the darkness was never truly outside us? The Zodiac transformed fear into a broadcast. The Somerton Man turned death into silence. They represent two ends of the same chilling spectrum, one screaming to be seen, the other desperately begging to disappear. And between them lies the most terrifying realization of all, that mystery itself is profoundly human. That our inherent need to understand the unexplainable might, in fact, be the very thing creating it. Visual. A slow, deliberate pan across empty police archives. Cold, stark fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting long, unsettling shadows. The faint, rhythmic sound of a typewriter fades in softly, letters typing themselves as if an unseen hand is crafting new riddles. The Zodiac's letters eventually stopped. The Somerton case was officially closed, but neither truly ended. Because every new generation discovers its own shadows, coded messages on our screens, encrypted signals, anonymous voices hiding behind countless usernames. The killers, the spies, the unfathomable mysteries, they never truly vanish, they simply adapt. And as long as we, as humans, continue to look into the unknown, well, the unknown will undoubtedly continue to look right back. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into these incredible human mysteries. If you found this as fascinating as I did, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a good puzzle, and definitely hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration into the unexplained. We've got so many more stories to uncover together. The wind over the Ural Mountains has a sound unlike anywhere else on Earth. It doesn't just blow, it howls, weaving through the ridges like a living thing, carrying whispers that seem to remember. In February 1959, those whispers became a scream. 9 young hikers set out from the Ural Polytechnic Institute on what was supposed to be a test of endurance, a trek through the Siberian wilderness toward Mount Torton. They were led by Igor Dyatlov, an experienced mountaineer, disciplined, methodical, and trusted by everyone who followed him. But their path took them through another mountain, one known by the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead. At first it was just another expedition. The group documented everything: cheerful photos, careful notes, and the laughter of youth echoing through the icy trees. They were strong, capable, ready for whatever the mountains would throw their way. But something about this journey would push them beyond human comprehension. When they set up their last camp on the snowy slope, visibility was near zero. The wind was violent. Still, they chose to pitch their tent right there on the open incline, rather than retreating into the forest. It was a decision that baffled experts for decades, and one that would lead to one of the most haunting mysteries in modern history. Days passed, then weeks. When the group failed to report back, rescue teams were sent. The first thing they found was the tent, half buried in snow, ripped open from the inside. Their gear, boots, food, and journals were neatly arranged inside, untouched. Whatever had happened that night, it had driven 9 trained survivalists to flee barefoot into sub-zero temperatures. The footprints told a strange story. They weren't chaotic, not the signs of a violent attack or wild panic. They were deliberate, calm, almost in a single file, as if the hikers had walked away quietly into the dark, each step leading deeper into death's silence. Then, one by one, their bodies were found, some near the tree line, others deeper in the snow. 2 of them, barefoot, had died huddled beside a makeshift fire. 3 more were scattered along the slope, as though trying to crawl back toward the tent. And then came the final 4. Their bodies were discovered months later, in a ravine beneath several feet of snow. But these bodies told a different story. Their injuries were brutal: crushed ribs, fractured skulls, internal damage so severe that investigators compared it to the force of a car crash. Yet there were no external wounds, no bruises, no weapon marks, just catastrophic internal trauma. One woman's tongue was missing. Another's eyes were gone. And on several of their clothes, traces of radiation. The Soviet investigation concluded with a single, chilling statement: the cause of death, an unknown compelling force. That phrase became legend, and so did the mystery. For decades, theories spiraled in every direction. Some said it was an avalanche, simple, logical, tragic. Others whispered of secret military tests gone wrong, experimental weapons, or radiation experiments. Still others pointed to UFOs, energy anomalies, or the wrath of something ancient buried within the snow. But the truth, if it exists, remains trapped beneath the ice, along with the secrets those 9 souls took with them. Let's go back to that night. Picture the camp, the tent faintly lit by the soft orange glow of a lantern. The wind outside is deafening, pressing against the fabric like a heartbeat. Inside, the hikers are asleep, exhausted but at peace. Then a sound, a low, vibrating hum. So low it's almost imperceptible, more a feeling than a noise. The ground trembles just slightly, like the world taking a breath. Someone stirs. Another sits up confused. The hum deepens. It's inside their heads now. It feels like nausea, like the pressure of diving deep underwater, like something clawing gently at the edge of sanity. They hear voices, or maybe it's the wind, indistinguishable. One of them panics, another screams. And then, chaos, a tearing sound, fabric ripping from within as they burst out of the tent into the freezing dark. But here's what's strange. There were no signs of an avalanche. The slope was shallow, barely enough to bury a person, let alone a tent. The snow around the camp was undisturbed. Nothing had slid, nothing had fallen. Whatever drove them out wasn't natural, it was psychological, a panic that came from nowhere and everywhere. Later researchers proposed that this panic could have been triggered by a rare weather event called infrasound. Under specific conditions, high winds passing over the mountain's surface can create low-frequency vibrations, inaudible to the human ear but powerful enough to cause disorientation, anxiety, and overwhelming dread. It's possible that the mountain itself was generating fear, that the hikers were driven mad, not by what they saw, but by what they felt. Yet that doesn't explain the radiation, or the injuries, or the strange orange lights seen in the sky that same night by witnesses miles away. Multiple locals reported glowing orbs drifting above the horizon, slow, deliberate, almost curious. The military denied any aerial activity, but radar data later revealed something in the area, something they couldn't identify. Even more curious, when the hikers' film rolls were recovered, one camera contained an image that has since fueled decades of speculation. A blurry frame showing what appears to be a bright object hovering above the tree line. Skeptics say it's a light leak. Believers say it's proof. The Mansi people, whose lands the hikers crossed, had long told stories of sacred mountains guarded by spirits. They warned of glowing spheres in the sky, omens of death. To them, Kholat Syakul wasn't just geography, it was a threshold, a place where the physical and the spiritual blurred. But beneath all myth, there's always a trace of something real. Soviet declassified documents released in the 1990s revealed that several military test sites were active near the Dyatlov Pass area. Missiles, parachute mines, and even early radiation experiments were being conducted in the region. Some experts believe the group might have accidentally witnessed something they were never meant to see and paid the price for it. One theory suggests a mid-air explosion, a blast wave that could explain the internal injuries, the disorientation, and the panic. But again, there were no burns on the victims, no debris, no crater, just silence. Others point to the simplest truth that maybe the mountain itself was responsible, that the unique geography of Dyatlov Pass amplifies electromagnetic disturbances, that static fields could have caused temporary hallucinations, confusion, even loss of coordination, that whatever they heard, or thought they saw, was enough to push them into an irrational flight response that ended in tragedy. But when rescuers returned to retrieve the last of the bodies, something strange happened again. Their compasses malfunctioned. Radio static filled their equipment. Some reported feeling a low hum under the snow, like the mountain was still speaking or warning them to leave. Decades later, new expeditions attempted to retrace the hikers' steps. Most returned with nothing but photographs and frostbite. But one group, in 2019, reported hearing an unexplainable resonance on their recording devices, the same deep frequency that supposedly drove the Dyatlov group insane. They described it as a sound that doesn't come from the air, but from inside the bones. Could that be coincidence? Or is the mountain still alive in some way, carrying the same pulse that ended 9 lives in 1959? The more we try to explain it, the less sense it makes. Nature doesn't kill this way. Humans don't survive that way. Something in between did this, something that watched, waited, and vanished back into the snow. When the case was reopened by Russian authorities in 2019, they officially concluded it was a slab avalanche, a mild snowshift that caused panic, but forensic experts quickly countered the claim. The slope didn't match avalanche behavior, and the pattern of injuries didn't align with falling snow. The final word was bureaucratic, not scientific, a tragic combination of weather and human error. But those who've studied the Dyatlov Pass incident know better. They say the evidence is incomplete, deliberately so. That pieces of the investigation vanished, that radiation samples were never fully disclosed, and that the tent itself, stored in a government archive, disappeared in the 1960s. Perhaps the real truth isn't something we can measure. Maybe it's something we can only feel, the way the air shifts when you stand in a place where history itself went silent. Today, hikers still visit Dyatlov Pass. They leave flowers, flags and photos near the memorial stone marking the names of the 9 who died. The wind there hasn't changed, it still hums, it still moves with that same rhythmic vibration, almost like breath. Locals say the mountain is listening, and sometimes, when the snow is still, it whispers. Whispers of laughter caught between gusts. Whispers of names that no one should know. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's the memory of 9 souls who never truly left. Because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only remembered. There are places whispered about in every culture. Fragments of forgotten worlds that cling to the edges of human memory. Half myth, half truth. But among them all, one name glows brighter than the rest: Atlantis. For centuries, this name has echoed like a song carried across generations, the tale of a civilization that rose higher than any before it, and vanished beneath the sea in a single thunderous night. But what if that story isn't fiction? What if it's a memory, one humanity has been trying to remember ever since? Plato's words, written around 360 BCE, describe Atlantis as a powerful island empire beyond the Pillars of Hercules, modern-day Gibraltar. It was said to be rich in gold, ivory, and technology that even Plato's contemporaries could barely comprehend. Its palaces glittered with metals lost to history, and its kings ruled with both wisdom and pride. But over time, arrogance grew, and the gods, displeased, sank the island in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, scholars dismissed the tale as allegory, a moral fable, not a record. Yet something in humanity keeps returning to it. In the 20th and 21st centuries, explorers, oceanographers, and archaeologists began finding strange clues: submerged ruins, megalithic roads, and ancient stonework, eerily reminiscent of cultures separated by oceans. Off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas lies a stretch of stones, the so-called Bimini Road, that some say is the outer wall of Atlantis. In the Mediterranean near Santorini lies the ash-covered city of Akrotiri, once part of the Minoan civilization, a society advanced in architecture, plumbing, and trade, suddenly destroyed by a volcanic cataclysm. Could the Minoans be the memory of Atlantis itself? The eruption of Thera, around 1600 BCE, sent tsunamis across the Aegean, burying cities in ash and drowning islands overnight. The sky turned black. Crops failed. And from the survivors' stories may have come the legend Plato later preserved, distorted by centuries of retelling, yet rooted in truth. But there's more. Sonar scans across the Atlantic have revealed massive symmetrical formations thousands of feet below the surface. Some appear as geometric shapes, rectangles, corridors, circular patterns that defy natural explanation. Most scientists dismiss them as natural formations or sonar errors, but to others, they're the remains of something lost, something too vast to belong to myth alone. And perhaps the most unsettling detail: in recent years, researchers have detected faint magnetic anomalies near these supposed structures, readings that don't align with the Earth's expected magnetic field. These distortions come and go, almost as if something beneath the seafloor is still active. Could it be geothermal? Maybe, or maybe the remnants of an ancient energy source, a technology that once powered a forgotten civilization. Plato mentioned that the Atlanteans harnessed a mysterious energy drawn from the earth and the sea. Ancient Egyptian texts describe light without flame in temples. And across the world, from the Andes to the Indus, there are carvings of glowing orbs, celestial maps, and machines that shouldn't exist in a prehistoric context. It's as if every ancient culture holds a shard of the same puzzle, memories of a world that burned too bright, too early, and was swallowed by the sea. Modern science now tells us that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, right when Plato dated the fall of Atlantis. Entire coastal civilizations could have drowned in those centuries of rising water. The question is, how advanced were they? Beneath the waters off Japan's Yonaguni Island lies another mystery, a colossal stepped monument with right angles, terraces, and stairways carved into solid rock. Divers report engravings and altars resembling temples. While skeptics insist it's a natural formation, the patterns are too symmetrical, too deliberate. Could Yonaguni be another Atlantis, a relic of a broader, interconnected ancient world we've long forgotten? If so, then history isn't what we think it is. Humanity may not have climbed slowly from ignorance to intelligence. We may have fallen from knowledge, rebuilding ourselves out of fragments. Imagine this: once, thousands of years before the pyramids, before Sumer, there was a network of civilizations stretching across continents, trading, building, exploring, and perhaps even manipulating forces of energy we no longer understand. Then came the floods, the Great Reset. The memory of that age turned into legend. Atlantis wasn't just a city, it was a symbol, a mirror reflecting our own potential and our downfall. But recently, something strange has been happening. Across the globe, from the Atlantic seabed to the Mediterranean, instruments have been picking up low-frequency sounds, deep hums, inaudible to the human ear, resonating from beneath the tectonic plates. These sounds aligned eerily with areas tied to ancient myths of submerged lands. Geologists say it's volcanic activity, but one research team noticed a repeating rhythm, almost like a pattern, as though the Earth itself is echoing something old, something buried. In 2023, marine biologists studying whale communication picked up a faint, synchronized sound off the Azores, a harmonic pulse that didn't match any known marine life or geological event. It repeated every 24 hours, on the same frequency. When cross-referenced with sonar data, the pulses seem to emanate from an underwater plateau, precisely where some believe Atlantis once stood. It's easy to dismiss coincidence, anomaly, artifact of equipment, but if these sounds are natural, why do they resemble coded sequences, intervals, and harmonics repeating like language? Some researchers now suggest the myth of Atlantis might represent more than a sunken civilization. It could be the story of an entire epoch when the Earth itself was different, when coastlines were new, and humanity lived closer to forces we can no longer control or even comprehend. If that's true, then the legends of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu might not be separate myths but memories of a shared global catastrophe. Think about it. Temples, pyramids, and sacred sites across the world all align with stars, solstices, and magnetic north. Civilizations separated by oceans somehow shared advanced astronomical knowledge. Did they inherit it or remember it? In the ruins of Egypt, the priests of Sais once told Solon, Plato's ancestor, that the Greeks were children, because they had no memory of what came before the flood. Many times, they said, has mankind been wiped from the earth, and perhaps they were right. Maybe Atlantis isn't lost. Maybe it's sleeping, waiting beneath the waves. Maybe it's not a place to find, but a warning to heed. Because every time humanity rises to its peak, mastering nature, bending energy, reaching beyond its limits, something happens. Something resets the clock. Maybe we're living through that cycle again. The deeper we look, the more we realize history isn't a straight line. It's a circle, spinning through fire, flood, and forgetting. Atlantis may not be gone. It might be part of us, our oldest memory, buried not in the ocean, but in our DNA. A whisper from a time when we held the power of gods, and lost it. And as satellites map the ocean floor, and sensors hum with strange frequencies, perhaps, just perhaps, the Earth is beginning to remember. The sea has always been a mirror of our own mystery. It reflects both our courage and our fear, our need to explore, to conquer, to understand. But beneath that shimmering surface lies something else entirely. Something that watches, something that waits. For centuries, the Atlantic Ocean has carried whispers of ships that vanish without a trace, of skies that turn black in seconds, of compasses spinning wild, as if the Earth itself forgets its direction. This stretch of water between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico has been called many names, but one name has outlasted all others: the Bermuda Triangle. 2 scientists, it's a coincidence. 2 sailors, it's a graveyard. To those who've seen it, it's something that cannot be explained. It begins in the winter of 1945. 5 Navy bombers Flight 19 take off from Fort Lauderdale for a routine training mission. Their leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, is experienced, calm, and confident. The skies are clear, the sea is quiet. But soon after they cross the Florida coast, something happens. The pilot's compasses begin to fail. Radio signals distort into static. Taylor's voice comes through the receiver. Trembling, we can't tell where we are. The ocean looks different. Nothing looks right. Their last transmission, minutes before vanishing, is almost a whisper. It looks like we're entering white water. We're completely lost. 5 planes, 14 men gone. No wreckage, no oil slick, no signal. And when the rescue plane sent after them disappears too, the Triangle claims 15 more souls. The Navy's report concludes with one haunting sentence: cause of disappearance unknown. And so begins the legend. Decades pass, and the disappearances continue. Ships found adrift, empty, radios still broadcasting distress calls long after the crew has vanished. In one case, an entire freighter, the Cyclops, vanishes with over 300 men aboard, the largest loss of life in U.S. naval history not involving combat. The ocean gives nothing back. But perhaps the most haunting case is not a warship, but a ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. It was December 1872 when a British vessel, De Gratia, spotted her drifting aimlessly in the North Atlantic. Her sails were half raised, the hull intact, no signs of struggle. But when the crew boarded, they found something deeply unsettling. The tables were set for breakfast. The captain's log stopped abruptly mid-sentence. The lifeboat was missing, but there were no signs of panic. Even the cargo to 1,700 barrels of alcohol remained untouched. Every man, woman, and child aboard had vanished. The Mary Celeste became the most famous ghost ship in maritime history. Theories bloomed like coral, piracy, mutiny, rogue waves, gas explosions, seaquakes, but none fit the evidence. It was as if the crew simply stepped off the edge of the earth. Some say it's coincidence that the Mary Celeste was found near the outer edge of what we now call the Bermuda Triangle. But sailors who know the ocean's moods whisper otherwise. They speak of something that lures ships off course, something that bends light, gravity, and even time itself. In the 1970s, oceanographers began studying strange magnetic readings in the region powerful enough to interfere with compasses and radio waves. The water itself seemed to distort signals, bending radar reflections like a mirror of smoke. One theory suggested methane hydrates, gas bubbles erupting from the ocean floor, could lower water density, causing ships to sink without a trace. But that didn't explain aircraft vanishing mid-flight, nor why compasses sometimes spin uncontrollably. In 2009, researchers aboard the deep-sea vessel Ocean Voyager recorded something extraordinary. Their sonar detected massive columns of rising water, shaped like vortexes, hundreds of meters wide, forming and collapsing in seconds. The phenomenon seemed natural, but the readings were inconsistent. The vortexes appeared on sonar, yet, when visual cameras looked, there was nothing there. Invisible storms, movements in water that shouldn't move, fields of distortion where GPS loses signal, and even light bends faintly blue. When the footage was later reviewed, an audio engineer noticed something else, a low-frequency hum, buried deep in the sonar feedback, rhythmic pulsing, almost organic. It was unlike anything known to marine science. There's a chilling pattern here. From 1872's Mary Celeste to 1945's Flight 19 to 2009's Lost Ocean Voyager probe, the disappearances align almost perfectly along electromagnetic anomalies mapped by satellites. When plotted together, these coordinates form a faint spiral pattern. Not random at all, as though something under the ocean floor is influencing the surface above. Geologists have long known of vast trenches and ancient volcanoes in the Atlantic ridge, but recent satellite gravity scans have revealed something far stranger. Geometric depressions on the seabed floor, straight lines, angles, perfectly square imprints, hundreds of meters across, buried beneath layers of sediment thousands of years old. They resemble foundations. Could it be that the same geological forces responsible for the legend of Atlantis are still active here, buried beneath the same waters that swallowed entire civilizations? If so, perhaps the Bermuda Triangle isn't cursed. Perhaps it's haunted by something ancient, a memory of what came before us. There's one story, though, that few outside the Navy ever heard. In 1968, a classified submarine operation known as Project Kronos was launched near Puerto Rico's Trench Zone, the deepest point of the Atlantic. Their mission: to investigate strange sonar readings that repeated every 7 hours. What they found was never made public, but declassified fragments describe unidentified acoustic activity of structured frequency and mechanical responses inconsistent with known fauna. One diver's log, later leaked, describes a faint metallic glow beneath the black water like city lights seen through fog. Moments later, contact was lost. The report ends abruptly with 2 words: mission terminated. But sometimes nature leaves its fingerprints. Satellite imaging from the early 2000s revealed heat signatures along the same coordinates, as though something far below the surface still radiated warmth. Deep-sea geologists argued it was volcanic, but the patterns were symmetrical and cyclic, flaring up every few months like a heartbeat, a living current, a pulse in the deep. In 2021, marine researchers from the University of Lisbon deployed a new generation of deep sensors to the region. The devices transmitted live environmental data, temperature, pressure, movement, until one by one their signals began to fade. The final transmission from one sensor, time-stamped at 3:14 a.m., recorded a burst of subsonic noise, almost like breathing. The data file ends with a sudden pressure drop, then silence. Maybe that's what the Bermuda Triangle really is: not a curse, not a vortex, but a living anomaly, a boundary between worlds we can't yet measure. The ocean isn't just water, it's a vast memory. It remembers everything, every wreck, every whisper, every name lost to its silence. And maybe the Mary Celeste was simply caught in that memory, suspended in a place where time folded and reality slipped. For when sailors claim they've seen lights beneath the waves, heard voices on dead radios, or felt their instruments freeze mid-signal, perhaps they're touching that same forgotten resonance, the hum of something old, something awake. In the end, we call it the Bermuda Triangle because we need a shape, a border, a name, something to contain our fear. But what if there are no borders? What if the ocean itself, all of it, is the anomaly? As storms rage and ships sail into horizons unmarked, the sea continues to take what it chooses, without malice, without reason. Because the ocean doesn't need to hate us, it only needs to remember us. And maybe, one day, when the last signal fades and the last sonar pulse echoes back from the deep, we'll hear it respond, not in words, but in the silence that has always been watching, the silence of the ocean.
The cold mist of early morning rolled over La Porte, Indiana, as if the earth itself was exhaling a secret. On the surface, the old farm looked ordinary, a stretch of rural quiet where the sounds of cows, chickens, and the occasional passing carriage once marked the rhythm of life. But beneath that quiet, buried beneath the rotted timbers of a house long gone, there was something that refused to stay silent. This was the home of Belle Gunness, the woman who would later be called America's Lady Bluebeard. Her story began like so many others at the turn of the 20th century. A widow, mother, and businesswoman seeking companionship in a world built for men. But what the men who answered her letters didn't know was that they weren't stepping into a home. They were stepping into a trap. Belle placed advertisements in Lonely Hearts columns, promising a warm hearth, steady income, and the dream of a new start on her farm. Men traveled from across the country clutching their savings and hope for love, but they never returned home. When their families wrote back to Belle asking where their sons or brothers had gone, her replies were always polite. "He went west to make preparations for our new life," she would say. Years later, when fire consumed the Gunness farmhouse in 1908, neighbors rushed to find only ashes, rubble, and bones. But what they discovered beneath the soil was beyond anything they could imagine. One grave, then another, then another. Dozens of bodies, each carefully buried, each representing a man who had once believed he'd found love. The newspapers were relentless. The La Porte Horror screamed one headline: "Woman Fiend Slays Scores." Read another. And yet, when the smoke cleared, one question lingered. Was Belle Gunness truly dead? The body found in the ashes was missing its head. Some said she had faked her death and fled. Others whispered that she'd become something worse. A legend that moved from town to town under new names, hunting new prey. But Belle's story isn't just about one woman's madness. It's about the dark hunger that hides inside human nature, a hunger that repeats itself through history. Because when investigators began to compare her methods to other unsolved disappearances across the Midwest, a disturbing pattern emerged. Letters, farms, lonely men, missing bodies from Illinois to Wisconsin. Small towns began reopening old cases. A woman matching Belle's description had been seen in Minnesota years after her supposed death. The handwriting in a set of personal ads from another state looked eerily familiar. One sheriff wrote in his report, "Either she has imitators, or she has become the shadow that all men fear to meet." As the years passed, Belle's name faded into folklore, a ghost story told by lamplight, a whispered warning for those too eager to trust strangers. But her legend never truly disappeared. In the 1930s, police records from the Dakotas described a series of deaths almost identical to Belle's earlier crimes. In each case, a woman vanished after being suspected of poisoning a suitor. No body, no conviction, just whispers. What makes the Belle Gunness story so unsettling isn't only the horror of what she did, but how she fit in so perfectly. In a world obsessed with monsters, aliens, sea creatures, ghosts, Belle reminded us that the real ones could write letters, bake pies, and greet you with a smile. Her methods were methodical. Investigators later reconstructed her timeline. Each man who arrived would first deposit money into Belle's account for safekeeping. Then, within days, he'd vanish. When workers questioned the heavy digging around the hog pen, Belle told them she was building a new cellar. The stench, she explained, came from spoiled meat. For years, no one questioned her, no one dared. And then came the fire. The inferno that consumed the Gunness farmhouse became one of America's earliest true crime obsessions. Reporters camped outside the ruins, describing the grisly discoveries in graphic detail. Local boys were paid to dig up remains. Entire families came to watch, bringing lunches as if it were a fair. In the ashes, investigators found coins, watches, and pieces of jawbone. Some of the skulls still had teeth intact. Among the charred debris lay a woman's body headless, unidentifiable. At her feet, the remains of 3 children. If it was Belle, she'd taken her children with her in death. But many believed otherwise, that she'd murdered them, set the fire, and vanished into the dawn. Forensic technology at the time couldn't confirm identity with certainty. Decades later, DNA testing offered clues, but no definitive closure. Some results suggested the remains weren't Belle's. The official record still reads, Belle Gunness missing, presumed dead. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Researchers tracing similar murders across the Midwest uncovered what they believed to be copycat crimes. In some, the letters sent to victims were signed with different names, but the handwriting matched. Police couldn't prove the connection, but the coincidences were too many. Others speculated that Belle wasn't acting alone. Her hired hand, Ray Lampher, was convicted of arson but maintained until his dying breath that Belle had escaped. She's alive, he told his cellmate, and she'll kill again. If true, it means that Belle Gunness may have continued her work long after LaPorte burned to the ground. The most disturbing part, her story didn't stay unique. Throughout the 20th century, echoes of Belle's crimes appeared again and again, from Lonely Hearts Killers in the 1950s to modern-day scams that lure victims with promises of companionship. In a way, Belle became the blueprint for emotional predators everywhere, a woman who weaponized love. In the psychological files of modern criminology, she's often described not as insane, but as calculating, intelligent, organized, aware. She didn't kill out of passion, she killed out of design. And that's what truly haunts us. Because while legends of monsters like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Creature may spark wonder, Belle Gunness represents a different breed of terror, one born from human hands, capable of charm and cruelty in the same breath. Her farm may be gone, her bones may be dust, but her shadow still lingers in our collective memory. Every time a case of online fraud or a missing person begins with the words "we met through a message," Belle's ghost smiles in the background. She wasn't just a killer. She was a mirror. A reflection of how desire blinds, how loneliness isolates, and how trust can become the deadliest weapon of all. And perhaps that's the ultimate mystery of humanity, not what lies in the sky or beneath the ocean, but what dwells within us. The monsters we fear most don't always come from the dark. Sometimes they walk among us, wearing familiar faces